Hi, I'm Marie. Mom and wife full-time, that's me. Paul, that's my husband, works a trading gig, and let's just say he's married to his job just as much as he is to me. Used to scribble down thoughts on books, reading between and beyond the lines, but these days I'm more about reading bedtime stories to our boy, Jack. Life threw some curveballs early on, lost my parents when I still needed them. That was rough. Then along came Paul, with a family in tow. His folks were the real deal, good people, you know. Took me in, no questions. Made me feel like I finally belonged somewhere again. Been with Paul for years now, since those college days when love seemed to be enough to fill any void. We settled into a rhythm, he at work and me taking care of everything else. But man, did that rhythm skip and stumble when Jack came into the picture. Paul changed, or maybe this was always him, just waiting for a reason to surface. He'd come home on a Friday night with a few too many drinks in him, loose-lipped and surly. "You gotta start shedding that weight, Marie," he'd snipe after slipping off his tie. "You barely fit in those jeans anymore." I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, but I told myself to brush it off, toughen up, maybe he'd cool down by morning. But mornings just brought hangovers and silence until the next round. The house became this place where I tiptoed, trying not to set Paul off. Jack, little trooper, he could feel it too, sticking close, watching his old man with wide, careful eyes. One particularly rough Friday, Paul came home and made a beeline for the fridge, crack open a cold one. I was on the floor with Jack, blocks scattered around. "Another day in paradise, huh?" Paul sneered, leaning against the counter. I forced a smile. Just the usual, you know, chasing after this little tornado. I ruffled Jack's hair, but my heart wasn't in it. Paul tossed his head back, downing half the bottle. "Maybe put some of that energy into a workout routine, eh?" I bit my tongue, counting to 10 in my head. "I'll look into it," was all I managed, shuffling Jack into his pile of toys, anything to escape the cutting edge in Paul's tone. But the weight wasn't just on my hips, it was on my chest, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know who I was in Paul's eyes anymore. I had finally shaken off those last stubborn pounds. It felt good, kind of. But Paul, well, he had a talent for finding flaws. My sweats and baggy tees were the new target. "Jesus, Marie, you dress like you're living at the gym. When was the last time you dressed up? Remember how you used to look?" There he was, leaning on the doorframe with that look that said everything his words didn't. I glanced down at my stretched-out mom life tee and yoga pants. "This is just practical, Paul. You want me all dolled up to do laundry and wrangle our son?" One corner of his mouth curled up like he had just made a successful trade. "I dunno, how about looking good for your husband? That used to matter." I sighed, rolling my eyes. "Well, unless my husband starts taking meetings at the playground or the grocery store, I think I'll stick with practical." He shook his head, chuckling without humor. "You used to care, Marie." His voice trailed off as he wandered back toward the living room, his disapproval hanging in the air like a bad smell. Then there was Jack, our boy, trying to navigate the shaky terrain between us. I was teaching him please and thank you, thinking manners mattered. Paul caught a bit of our lesson one afternoon and scoffed. "Look at you, teaching him to be Mr. Manners. You want him to get trampled on?" "Manners are important, Paul. It's about respect," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Respect is earned, not politeness policed," he shot back. "He needs to toughen up, not be some yes, please pushover." Then the whole freeloader thing started. One night, Paul came home, tie askew, looking like he had won and lost the same fight. "Nice day?" he asked, sarcasm heavy as he glanced around what I'd come to see as our minefield of a home. I put down Jack's toy and braced for what was coming. "Just the same, dealing with tantrums and spills. How was work?" Paul's laugh was short and sharp. "Work? Oh, it was just dandy, supporting a parasite." My cheeks burned. "Excuse me?" My voice was a little too loud. Jack's eyes flitted from me to Paul, sensing the shift. A parasite, Marie. I work, you play house, he said, each word pointed and heavy. That's the thanks I get? I am raising our child, Paul. Your child. That's work. That's vital, I said, my voice rising now, too. Jack started fussing then, picking up on the tension. I swept him up into my arms, trying to shield him from the fallout. Paul had a knack for knowing when he'd pushed too far, and his next words were more measured. Marie, I go out there and deal with sharks all day. Come home, and what? I don't know, something different. I can't be your one-man show, Paul, I said softly, trying to defuse the bomb that our marriage had become. I'm here, juggling a million things for us, for Jack. We looked at each other then, really looked, and I wondered if he saw the plea in my eyes. The help me, back me up, be with me that I felt screaming inside. But he turned away, the finality of his silence telling me that no, he didn't see. He didn't want to. One day, the disrespect boiled over. Jack scrunched up his little face and called me a name, a real zinger. He got it from Paul. You're just a lazy bum, he had hurled at me, his tiny voice bitter and angry. I felt like I'd been slapped. What? Jack, no, you can't say that, I stumbled, shocked. He folded his arms, stubborn as his dad. Dad says it, so can I. That was the last straw. When Paul got home, I was waiting, steaming like a forgotten kettle. You know what your son called me today? I laid into him without waiting for an answer. Paul dropped his keys on the counter and chuckled, clearly not seeing the line had been crossed. What did he say? The truth? He tossed his words over his shoulder as he walked to the fridge, his casualness like acid on my skin. Is that funny to you? I was shouting now, my usual restraint snapped tight as a dry twig. Your son is calling me names. Paul leaned against the kitchen counter, beer in hand, a smirk blooming on his face. Oh, come on, Marie. Kid's gotta learn to stand his ground. I was staring at him, hands balled into fists. By disrespecting his mother? He shrugged, a lazy lift of his shoulders that sent me teetering on the edge. You're too soft on him. Look, he's getting some spine. Spine? My voice shot up another octave. He's learning to be just like you. Paul grinned and ruffled Jack's hair. Ain't that right, champ? I turned to Jack, who was looking at us with eyes that were too old for his face. Jack, listen to me. What you said to me this morning was wrong. You can't talk to people like that. Jack's chin jutted out, defiant and stubborn. But Dad. I don't care what Dad says, you listen to your mom. I cut him off, my heart thudding like a drum. I was desperate for him not to follow in Paul's footsteps. But Paul wasn't letting it go. The boy's gotta learn to speak up. World's not gonna hand him anything. You keep coddling him, he'll end up. I get it, all right? I get it. I cut him off, feeling the weight of his words like a physical thing on my chest. But there's a line. You don't get it, do you? Paul threw up his hands, that ugly smirk still there. Whatever, Marie. You make mountains out of molehills. I turned from him, that burning in my chest now a churning mess. This is not how I want our son to grow up. This disrespect ends now, it ends here. Paul just took a swig of his beer, and I knew, right then, my words were just bouncing off him. I looked at Jack, really looked at him. You apologize to me, now, I said, the power in my voice surprising even me. Jack's eyes darted between me and Paul, but he knew that tone. Sorry, Mom. The word was small, almost lost in the kitchen, but it was there and it was a start. I moved closer to Jack, knelt down so I was eye level with him. Thank you. We treat each other with respect in this house, you got it? Paul snorted behind me, but I ignored him. Jack nodded, a hint of my boy peeking through that new sullen shadow he wore. It was a crack in the wall Paul was building around him, a crack, but also a starting point. I stood up, squared my shoulders. We're going to fix this, Jack. No more name calling, no more disrespect. We're better than that. I took Jack's hand, and we left the room, leaving Paul and his smugness behind us. I stood there on the sidewalk, my phone shaking in my hand. It was one of those moments where your gut ties up in knots. There, across the street, Paul was laughing it up with some woman. Blonde, curvy, and looking at my husband like he was the last piece of chocolate in the box. My thumb pressed record before I even decided to. The walk home felt a million miles long. A part of me hoped it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Back in our kitchen, I threw my keys on the counter. Paul was sitting there with a beer, like he always did, but today the sight of him made me sick. Without a word, I tossed my phone on the table in front of him, the video playing. Care to explain? Paul looked at the screen, his eyes going hard when he saw what was on it. He muted it, placed it calmly on the counter, and then looked straight at me. Yeah, she's beautiful, he said, his voice dripping venom. You used to be like that. I felt the slap of his words, my cheeks flaming with anger, my body tense. So, that's it, huh? You parade around town with some woman while I'm at home? Paul stood up, his chair scraping back against the tile. He was too close now, his voice low and mean. What, you stalking me now, Marie? Can't handle the fact that maybe there's more out there than what's inside these walls? I was reeling, feeling the pieces click together. Cut the crap, Paul. You're cheating. He didn't even flinch. You want to know why, he said, his chest puffing up. Because around her, I'm somebody. Not just the guy who pays the bills or the bad guy 'cause he ain't Mr. Rogers. So that's it? I edged back, feeling the counter dig into my hips. Your family's not enough for you? Paul snorted and grabbed his beer again. It stopped being enough a long time ago. Maybe if you'd have kept up with yourself, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere. The bile rattled in my throat. I'm not the one who promised till death do us part. His laugh was short and punched the air. Those are just words, Marie. They stopped meaning anything to you a long time ago. I should have been crying, but the tears wouldn't come. I was just empty and angry. I gave you everything, Paul. I gave you a son, I made a home for us. And this is how you repay me? He took a long drink, then leaned back against the counter. You gave me a home? Looks like a prison to me. Same old, every damn day. You think that's a life? We made vows, Paul. I shouted, my voice cracking. Yeah, and you broke them every day with your sweatpants and constant nagging. His face twisted into something ugly, something monstrous. That was the last thing he said before I walked out, my heart numb, anger seeping into every corner of my being. I was on edge the whole ride over to Paul's folks' place. It was gonna be nasty, but I had to lay it out for them. They needed to know who their son really was. His mom answered the door, with a happy smile. Marie, what brings you here at this hour? I just barreled past her. I gotta show you both something. Once his dad came in, I played them the video straight up. His mom gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. His dad, red-faced and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, he barked at me, Paul's gotta stop this nonsense now. And like that, all hell broke loose. That night back at our place, Paul kicked off as soon as I walked in. You had to drag my parents into this, didn't ya? His voice was loaded, ready to fire. Yeah, well someone's got to. I shot back, my nerves steel. He was a storm brewing. With a step towards me, his hand raised, but he didn't get far. You're bad. Jack's voice cut through, strong and braver than any of us. Paul stopped stone cold. Paul's hand dropped, and his mask slipped a second, shock in his eyes. But then he hardened up again, cold as steel. I want you out, he said, spitting the words like they were sour. Take the kid and go. So we went. With Jack's hand in mine, I didn't look back. Bags thrown in the back of the car, we headed for the city, miles of road unwinding like my thoughts. The luxury house was something else, my unexpected inheritance. 2 stories, white columns, and a porch you could throw a party on, all waiting in another city, away from everything that had gone wrong. None of my folks, not even a whisker of Paul or his clan, had ever set eyes on it. When we pulled up to this grand house, Jack's face pressed to the window, eyes as wide as the moon. "Is this a castle?" His voice was a whisper, almost lost in the vastness of it all. "Something like that," I said, a laugh escaping me for the first time in. I couldn't even remember. We stepped into that house, our new beginning. It was silent, save for the echo of our footsteps on the marble floors, bouncing off the high ceilings crowned with crystal chandeliers. The furniture was swanky, left behind by folks I wish had lasted a lifetime longer. I plopped down on a couch soft as clouds, and finally, Jack's laughter filled the rooms. The sound of it was more luxurious than anything else in this place. We explored room after room, Jack running ahead like he was leading a parade. Each new door opened to a room grander than the last. "I call the biggest one," he declared, claiming a bedroom that overlooked a garden already blooming with the promise of spring. Laying him down to bed that night, the day finally caught up with me. My eyes burned with the tiredness of it all, but looking around at the high ceilings, the gold trimming catching moonlight, I knew we were worlds away from where we started. Sitting there, in the quiet of a room too nice for today's shadows, I whispered into the darkness, "We made it, kiddo." Life in the big house slowly shed the shadows of the past. Jack's giggles filled the halls more than the echoes of old fears. Most days, it felt like we had always been there, just the two of us, in our new safe haven. The house, with its silent strength, was keeping the world at bay, until the day Paul showed up, uninvited and unwelcome. He was at the door in a storm of anger. I opened it and there he was, looking like trouble had followed him around. "You can't just disappear with my son, Marie." I leaned against the door frame, unfazed. "He's my son too. And I didn't disappear. I moved on." Paul's scowl deepened. He glanced around, taking in the opulence of the place with wide, disbelieving eyes. "How can you afford this? I know you don't make this kind of dough." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. "Well, turns out I had a little left over each month. Who knew?" He raised an eyebrow, a sly accusation in his gaze. "And I'm struggling to cover rent for that old place by myself. It's damn near impossible now that they jacked up the price." I shook my head. He always was good at playing the martyr. "That's not my problem anymore, Paul. I've been using my own savings to cover the gap in the rent for years. Savings that, thank God, I don't need to bleed dry for that house anymore." The greed in his eyes flared up like wildfire. "What, and you're living here in luxury while I—" "Stop right there," I cut in. "This isn't your concern. This," I motioned to the grand house behind me, "is mine. Mine and Jack's." Paul took a step forward, but I didn't back down. "Look, I came here to fix things. I'm saying I forgive you for all this, sneaking around." His audacity almost knocked the wind out of me, but I had a little surprise that would put the brakes on his charade. From behind the door, I pulled out the divorce papers and slapped them into his chest. "And here's what I'm saying. We're done." He looked as if I'd slapped him with a physical hand, his face twisting through confusion, rage, and then settling on calculating desperation. "You can't do this. What about Jack?" I stood taller, my resolve like iron. "I'm doing it for Jack. He doesn't need this chaos you bring. Sign the papers, Paul. It's over." He glanced from the papers to me, then back again, his posture deflating slightly. "You'll regret this. You can't make it alone." "That's where you're wrong." I smiled, not from humor but from a deep-seated confidence. "I'm already making it. And without you, we're doing more than just fine. We're thriving." With a shake of his head, Paul looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and strode away, clutching the papers like they were a snake that could bite. Once he was gone, the house seemed to exhale with me. I closed the door gently, turning back to the life I had fought so hard for. Life had a way of tossing stuff at you, hard and fast. It was Thursday, the kind of day that should have been easy, but it wasn't. We shirked dinner for a bit, setting up ramps out of old books and watching the Lego car stupidly do flips and land upside down. Jack's laugh was infectious, the sort that wiped clean the worry lines off my face. His enthusiasm was a reminder that amid all the crap, there was still good, simple, unadulterated good. Then it came, a banging on the door that made my stomach drop and my face lose all its motherly warmth. Paul had a knack for bad timing and worse entrances. I pulled the door open and there he was, looking like he'd just come from a bar fight or lost a bet. "Paul, what's up?" He scowled, that usual look he gets when he thinks the world owes him. "So, this the high life? You playing house with my Jack while I'm scraping pennies just to get by?" Jack peeked from behind me, a knight in Lego armor. "Hey, screw off, Paul. Don't talk to my mom like that." Paul's face turned a nice shade of tomato. "The hell? You let him talk like that?" I stood there, hands on hips. "He's expressing himself. Something I should have done with you a long time ago." Jack came out from behind me, all fierce. "Yeah, get lost. My mom, my rules." Paul's anger was something else, a storm that had nowhere to go. "You think you're smart, huh? Talking to your old man like that?" Jack squared his shoulders, a small David to Paul's Goliath. "Don't gotta think. I know it. Mom knows it." Paul opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There was Jack, staring him down, waiting. This was no place for Paul anymore, no place for his bluster and noise. After a tense moment, Paul shook his head, muttered something under his breath and stormed off the porch. Jack turned to me with this look, the kind of look that said, "We got this." I nodded, all the agreement he needed. We went back to boiling pasta and racing Lego cars. That's how we do it, simple, nothing fancy. We just keep on. I was gabbing on the phone with Miss Dottie, Paul's mom, who was more my family than is now. "Honey, you just holler if there's anything you need, 'kay?" Her voice was always a warm blanket over the line. "We're all good, Miss Dottie. Really, couldn't be better," I assured her, twisting the cord around my finger. She hummed a pleased note. "Just makes my heart full to hear that. Keep on keeping on, you hear?" Frank, her husband, yelled from somewhere behind her. "Tell her that any time she wants to send over some of that lemon meringue, we won't complain." A genuine laugh burst out of me. "Expect a pie on your doorstep soon, Frank." Exchanging a few more pleasantries, we hung up. I shook my head. If someone had told me last year I'd be mining gold from the wreckage of my married life, I would have laughed in their face. Jack pulled on my sleeve, waving his drawing like a five-star general. "Look, Mom. This is our house." I looked down. His scribbles had heart. A big square house and two stick figures, a little one and a tall one, with sloppy grins and a lopsided sun shining down. The swing I'd put up for him stood out in green and brown strokes. "That's us, right?" A dumb question, really, but it made him nod with pride. "And I'm gonna sell my art, make us rich." There was serious conviction behind his toothy smile. "If you do, you're buying me that fancy coffee I've been eyeing?" I nudged him with a wink. He nodded, his expression all business. "Only the best for my mom." And just like that, the knot in my chest loosened a bit more. Sundays were like that, full of little miracles. The thing was, life had done a real number on us, but it was looking up. Paul got slammed by the door he let hit him on his way out. The fancy house he rented to impress his mistress? Turned out to be a couple of sizes too big for his wallet. Now he was cooped up in a tiny apartment, the kind of place his pride wouldn't have let him consider a year ago. And the mistress? She hightailed it the minute his pockets turned up empty and his promises hollow. But that was a tale for some other time. Right now is about Jack and me, and the park we were marching to, hand in hand. We stepped out, and the door clicked shut, a soft full stop to one chapter before immediately kicking off the next. Jack tugged me towards the park, his excitement bubbling over. I didn't glance back at our home, no need. Ahead was everything that mattered, me and my boy, parts of a world that kept on spinning, even when you felt like you'd fallen off.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.